as Tina said, there has always been talk about the pitch process and complaints on both sides, whether it's the expense, the time and effort that it takes to go through the process, the fairness of it, and that has not stopped. I think what COVID has done, though, as Tina said, is made people take a step back and say, is the process necessary to run at this moment? What we have found is, over the last 10 weeks that we have been working in this environment, is that we have some clients that press pause and they said they will pick up the process in third or fourth quarter of this year. It's just not something that they can focus on in the remote environment. It wasn't going to work with them. We had other clients that said, mid-March, okay, we're going to press pause because we think we can pick this back up in early April. I think we all kind of didn't think that we'd still be here 10 weeks later, if I'm being honest. And so we've had, clients pick the process back up pretty quickly and finished a number of final presentations. And then lastly, we have had some clients start the pitch and the pitch process in this environment. And I think what has been really key in those instances is understanding, what is the purpose of the pitch? What are they hoping to get out of it? What, setting up clear expectations with both the client and agency to understand, how the process needs to pivot a bit to address this work from home environment. And then really being clear on roles of people on both the client team and, the agency team. I should take a step back and also say that, our clients, at Pile, we're typically working with procurement and the marketing teams as we run these pitches. So sometimes we're brought in through marketing and then we're partnering with procurement. Sometimes we're brought in through procurement and then we're linked to marketing, and then sometimes it's a joint effort. I don't know, Tina, if that's wildly different than how you work, but it's a combination of both. And at Pile, we're really clear what does our role need to be then in that process, so that everyone knows what is expected of them at each step of the process. I think what's been interesting over the last 10 weeks, and Tina started to say this a bit, is that you could look at the pitch process and say it's been negatively impacted by working from home, but the reality is there have been some positives that have come out of this. I do think that it has kind of leveled the playing field a bit, in that now the focus during the pitch process is truly on the agency's capabilities, their people, and less about kind of the pitch theater that sometimes you can fall into. So I don't know how many of those on this have been involved in pitches where there's a lot of time spent by agencies on setting the stage for the room and making sure that everyone has the right pads of papers and matching pens and all of those things, which is fine. But the reality is that's not what wins an agency a pitch. What wins an agency a pitch is the strategic thinking, or whatever they're being tasked with, but it's the thinking, it's the capabilities, it's the people. And by going to this kind of virtual environment, I think it has brought that focus back. And so that's been a positive. I also think we've been able to speed up the process a bit. I mean, certainly not having to get on, planes and spend days traveling, that has helped pick up the pace of things, not to an unreasonable, pace, but we've been able to cut out times in between each step of the way. And I mean, the negative obviously is the lack of face-to-face. I mean, that is, we can't avoid that. But I think what we have found as we've changed and pivoted our process is that, there are ways to stimulate and build chemistry along the way. Our process at Pile, we work really hard to focus on, allowing our clients to simulate what it would be like to work with an agency, as best we can during the pitch process, so that they know what they're getting into. And what's interesting is that we've had clients that are really willing to commit the time and spend more time with these agencies and have more frequent interactions along the way, so that it's more of a sprint type of working environment, so that they can work for a couple of days, have a check-in, and then kind of go off and work again. And what's been interesting is just that involvement and engagement of the clients and agencies. It keeps them motivated in the process. I think we've learned, that people do have probably a shortened attention span though on Zoom or whatever platform you're using. So, there is a time limit. I think anytime you get beyond 90 minutes or so, people start to tune out a bit. So that's why these more frequent, kind of shorter, touch points seem to work pretty well. So I think it's interesting. So your question here that just popped up the poll about, do you think it's an agency can really shine? I think yes. I mean, I've seen agencies, for as much, if you read the trade press, everything is bad about agencies and they're all failing, and there's a lot of negative out there. But I've been really pleasantly surprised by the agility of agencies over the last 10 weeks, to see how they have moved to working from home, to see how they've been able to produce work. I think we've started to move beyond all of the same, looking like the work is coming off of the same brief, and we're really starting to see, agencies develop work and doing it in ways that I've said a few times that, like, it will be interesting to see the impact of the pace and the production part of this, that clients, can't unsee the pace that agencies have been able to move at, when they've been producing new work. But during the pitch process, I think agencies have been able to shine. They have been able to put the right team on the business. I think casting and getting the right people has been more important than ever. Certainly, as agencies have gone through some, downsizing over the last few weeks, it is, important to make sure that they're only going after opportunities that are right for them, and so therefore putting those right people on the business. We've also found that having smaller groups on these, on these calls has helped build that chemistry. I think gone are the days where you'd walk in the room and there would be 20 people on the agency side in there. It's not necessary. It's much easier to build that chemistry and see what it would be like to work together when it's a handful of people involved. Tina already talked about the technology piece and how that is so important. Obviously, it's the key to the process right now, but we've really seen agencies almost go back to the basics. I mean, Tina, you mentioned take 10 minutes at the start to make sure things work, but putting a slide in on how best to make the platform work, not to assume that everyone knows how to use Zoom or how to use any of these other platforms. I was recently on a presentation, and I don't mean to make a generalization, but the CEO of the company was on, and he was probably the least tech savvy of the group, and he admitted it. But it was kind of, he was disarmed a bit by the fact that the agency kind of walked through, here's what button you need to push, here's how we're going to make it work. And by the last presentation, he was feeling pretty comfortable in terms of how to make Zoom work and make it work best for him. But so in the early days of these virtual pitches, agencies kind of took that step and put here's what works, here's what doesn't slide at the beginning of the presentation, and it really helped. And to Tina's point, sending materials in advance, as much as agencies have always dreaded doing that because people will flip ahead, you have to in this environment. You need to make sure that you have a backup, or agencies have had great luck setting up a portal. So you send the link and then everyone's able to access that. Is it a little clunky? Perhaps, but at least all of the content is there and no one is missing out. But it's been, I think making sure people know how to use the platform is important. But, we've run, as I said, a number of pitches, a retail client from beginning to end, virtually. The client is thrilled as they were able to build chemistry. At one point, the agency had sent, before their first briefing meeting, customized Zoom backgrounds for each of the client team members. That also just showed kind of how engaged in the process the agency was and committed to it. And while it's a small thing, it really did go a long way for that, for that particular client.